Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 343 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is someone who's joined us on the podcast before. It's a real pleasure to welcome back Sarah Henry. Sarah is a counsellor, trainer and diversity consultant known for a generous invitation. Let's have a healthy, growthful conversation about race. Today, she's here to do just that as we explore her concept of race and everyday friction. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
A very warm welcome to episode 343 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, welcome you to our three topics today, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice, where today we're speaking all things supervision, but particularly if you work remotely, either online, via a video app or via telephone, does your supervisor need to hold formal training? We're going to look into that. We're also then going into practice matters. Rory has beautifully teed that up. We're going to be hearing from Sarah Henry again and the lecture in the CPD library on racial identity and the fear of conversations about race. So make sure you stay around for that one. And then we go into student services, recognizing you, students, on your formal journey to become counselors, psychotherapists, or to learn the skills that you may use in other parts of your life. And today we're going to be speaking about endings, ending well, saying goodbye, the art of goodbye in counselling training. They say, Rory, all good things come to an end, don't they? Well, this is just the beginning of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, so let's get into ethical, sustainable practice and speak about why we should have a supervisor that's trained in online and telephone work if we practice that way, Rory.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Ken. And I do believe that supervision has become a lot more technical over the last few years. You know, a supervisor, I speak as a supervisor myself, my supervisees will come to me and ask me information because I'm their supervisor, and it is incumbent on me to keep my CPD up to scratch and to be, I think, just a little bit further ahead maybe of the people I'm supervising. When I mean further ahead, to be informed, because supervision's a collaborative endeavor where you're working with someone and you're trying to help them, you're trying to help support their practice. And it was all well and good, I think, up till, the 2020s. And then we had the pandemic, and there was a huge turn to working online, the online turn, as I like to call it. Where before it had been a very niche activity, now it's it's a standard offer for a lot of therapists. I was looking at a directory yesterday, and there were so many people who offered in the room and online. It's now become just a standard offer in the economy of counselling, which does pose the question: if you're offering online therapy as a therapist, you need supporting in every aspect of your practice with supervision. And is your supervisor informed? Are they informed about the online world? Do they know about how working online can be different to working in the room? And there are a few things that we might need to consider if we're supervising someone who works online. And that is things like maintaining therapeutic presence without cues, body language, as it's sometimes called. If you're on the phone, it's very, very difficult it's impossible to see someone's bodily movements if you're on the phone. And even on video link, usually people are seen from the waist up, aren't they? So again, it's very difficult to get a sense of the whole person. Things like managing silences. I was listening to someone on the phone the other day, a friend, they were having a chat, and I was listening intently, and I heard my friend say, "Are you there?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I thought you'd gone. And it's one of those strange things that, if you're in a room and you're listening intently and you're quiet, people can see that. But if you're on the phone, it gives that sense of, wonder if they're still there. So you have to change the way you respond, and a bit more nuanced. So if I'm on the phone nowadays, I go ha, which sounds a bit false, but it gives the person on the other end an indication you're still there. And also, I think the data protection piece. There's a lot of platforms out there where people can meet online, but what due diligence does a therapist need to demonstrate to show that they're actually data compliant? And all this is really about being competent in your practice, but also showing members of the public that you are doing due diligence. So I think it's essential nowadays, if you're working online, to have a online and telephone informed supervisor, someone who knows and is trained in it and understands the nuances of the online world.
Definitely. Well, for this topic, it starts for me with the ethical framework. If you're a counsellor, psychotherapist, certainly in the United Kingdom, you're going to be working to an ethical framework, and I know in many other countries of the world as well. I know that there are countries where maybe there isn't an ethical framework, but very often then you might look to a different country and their ethical framework. And if you look to your ethical framework around supervision, undoubtedly it's going to suggest that you choose a supervisor who understands the way that you work. And I'll give an example of that. If I was working with, my client group was children and young people, and I had a supervisor who didn't have any formal training in working with children and young people, well, how is that supervisor going to help me navigate my practice? They have an area of information that is missing. So we need to look for a supervisor that understands how we work. And that will, when you're a student, it starts off with the modality. So while you're studying, if you're studying TA, then you're going to want a TA supervisor because it matches your modality. But after you graduate, you might go into a specialist area. You would expect that your supervisor would have formal training. And that's the important thing, not an idea of, not have read an article on, but formal training within that area. Now, if you look to, and I'm just going to use one example, the BACP ethical framework here in the United Kingdom, that is mentioned. But the BACP also have competences for supervisors. And within the competence for supervisors, it outlines very clearly that if you're working with a supervisee who is working in an online environment, that you as the supervisor should hold formal training in that area. And if you look to the curriculum that the BACP suggests for training supervisors, you've got supervision training, which is in the room, what you need to know to be a supervisor and hold a supervisee. And then they have special interest areas or additional competences, which again carry a curriculum and a formal training route. And one of them is online and telephone working. So you train to be a supervisor, and then you also train in that additional area to hold the competences that are required to be able to help that supervisee navigate their practice within that area. Now, Here's the thing. You mentioned the history and why there's such an uptake of online or remote working, and COVID started it all off. And we, as a training provider, we put together a online and telephone training course for practitioners, and we did that as COVID broke out, and we did that in collaboration with ACTO here in the UK, the Association of Counselling and Therapy Online. We chatted with the BACP, the NCPS, and we really got the information that we needed to put together a curriculum that would train counsellors how to do the online working. Now, to date, over 40,000, that's a big number, practitioners have taken that training, graduated, and have a certificate in online and telephone counselling. They all need supervisors.
Yeah.
And I wonder, it often makes me wonder, I think it's one of the greatest growth areas in supervision. If I was a supervisor right now and I didn't have formal training in online and telephone counselling, it's the number one course I would be going to right now. And I know in our supervision training, Rory, that you wrote, you built the curriculum to include the extra module of the recommended BACP curriculum that covers not only how to be a supervisor and hold somebody in a room, but also how to hold somebody in supervision online. And I think gone are the days, and I really hope gone are the days, that practitioners and more particularly supervisors would think, oh, well, you know what? There's not much of a difference. It's just over video or it's just over a phone. I'm just going to take what I know and apply that via this platform. I hope those days have passed us. I hope through our podcast and through the messaging and through the ethical bodies and through the suggestions that are out there, we all see you can't do that. You're not doing best by your clients or by yourself for your practice. It does require formal training. And if you're working online, remotely, and your supervisor doesn't hold formal training in that area, how are they guiding your best practice? Because as you mentioned, Rory, there are many areas that differ when working online. There are psychological conditions that emerge only online, like disinhibition effect. It's really important that we know those and understand them, and that we get the guidance from our supervisors. So I think hopefully that the tide has changed and it is more recognized now.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. We're moving into becoming 21st century therapists and 21st century supervisors. You know, a lot of the ways of working that we had in the 20th century, and it's not that far long gone, we're only 25 years into the millennium. So there's a lot of people who listening to this who may have trained, in the 2000s like I did, or I've received training in recently that is really 20th century training. Really need to think about the new ways of working, but also the research that underpins it. I was at the BACP research conference a couple of weeks ago, and it was in my hometown of Manchester. It was a wonderful conference. And one of the things that is growing and emerging is that we have to work within research. We have to consult research. And there's a huge amount of research, a massive amount of research on online and telephone counselling. And certainly the research that I've come across, I've used it in my supervision practice to help supervisees understand the sometimes very subtle differences. Now, I'll give you one subtle difference. If you're working on the phone, you might want to think about making sure that your client has a picture of you. In other words, they know who you are, or can see at least a picture. And it could be on your directory or on your website or wherever it is. The reason for that is that without any kind of form of reference, clients may build a kind of fantasy vision of you. And that can lead into kind of fantasy transference. So I think it's very, very important that you have a visual picture of yourself. Obviously, for sight impaired or blind clients, that might be a different process. But it's just a very small things, little things like making sure that if you're working on the phone, that you're working with an adult, not a child. How do you know that the person you're working is who they are? And that's especially important in things like child protection. So there's lots of areas where a supervisor can help guide and build someone's practice to encompass online and telephone work safely and ethically, and more important, confidently. I think that for those who are thinking, I'm just going to go online, I'm going to give this online business a bit of a look at, I think you need to go in very, very well informed and very well supported. And I would suggest that, if you're just starting in the online world, speak with your supervisor, get some kind of plan in place, get some kind of structure, and then come back and speak about that experience and how it develops, because it is a different way of working. And at the end of the day, we're in service of clients. We're in service of clients, the general public. We're responsible to them, and we must be competent.
Oh, yeah. Bravo, Rory. There's a handout for this. It's called Why Have an Online and Phone Therapy Informed Supervisors, written by our very own Rory Lee Oakes. Yay!
Yo.
And you can get it for free. For free. How do you get it? Well, you go to counsellingtutor.com, because that's our home. And from there, click on the podcast tab and find episode 343. It's today's episode. Right there is the download. Download it, enjoy it, read over it, consider for your practice. And if you're interested in training as an online and telephone informed therapist, just go to Counselling Tutor and click on our products tab. You'll see our course there. It is 80 hours of training. It is exceptional training. Like I say, over 40,000 students have graduated that. And if you are interested in becoming a clinical supervisor and also offering supervision, not only in the room, but also to those who might practice online, we'll have a look at our clinical supervision training course, including online and telephone working. And that is all at counsellingtutor.com under the products tab. So there is ethical, sustainable practice for today. And as we're back out of that, we go into Practice Matters, the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor podcast, where Rory always reaches out, speaks to the most incredible professionals in our sector. And Sarah Henry is a repeat visitor with Counselling Tutor. It's not the first time that she's been on the podcast, Rory, but has also made a beautiful lecture that Rory speaks about. And it's that racial identity, fear of conversations about race. And I think that I can recognize a little bit of that in my own journey, really, the tiptoeing around and the almost walking on eggshells and don't want to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. It's a topic that I think we're going to get a lot out of, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I love Sarah. We've spoken a lot over the last year. She is someone who's really ploughing new ground in conversations about race. And I met up with her, and she talked about things perhaps that's, and I'll be clear, white sides of the population, people like me, may not completely understand. And she's called it everyday friction. I caught up with Sarah, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Navigating life comes with its fair share of challenges. But for those from marginalised communities, the path can be even more complex. Subtle moments, social attitudes, and institutional barriers can create what today's guest describes as everyday friction, a persistent, often invisible force that wears down, holds back, and grinds the gears of daily life. I am delighted to welcome back Sarah Henry, a counsellor, trainer, and consultant whose pioneering work invites us to examine those lived experiences more deeply. Sarah offers race awareness training, in her own words, is exciting and universally accessible, helping people engage meaningfully with race-related issues in thoughtful and transformative ways. Today, Sarah shares her personal journey behind her theory of everyday friction, how it emerged from a lived reality as a black woman and what it reveals about power, resistance and the resilience of showing up. So Sarah, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
It's a joy. It's always a joy. And we met up in between the podcasts. So one of the things we were talking about was everyday friction. And I thought that was really a really interesting metaphor, because when you have friction, usually means that something's not going in the right direction. You can't engage properly. There's a lot of heat with friction, and it's wearing. Friction eventually wears things out. So what is your take on everyday friction in terms of lived experience?
So the way that this came to my mind, I had the image of sandpaper and a plank of wood. So the fact that friction does wear something down is, yes, that is the case. But what it can also do is it can shape something beautifully. And there's that other side also. So when I think about everyday friction from a race-related point of view, what it was that I was curious about, and I was initially curious about, was how was it that I had such an acute awareness of my own racial identity, although I'd not explicitly given it particular focus in looking at developing my racial identity. I'd not read a ton of books about being Black and Black history. I'd not listened to a load of podcasts. I'd not watched a lot of films. So I got curious as to what is it that meant that I, as a Black woman, was so aware of the fact that I was Black and the meanings that I attribute to that, and that my white counterparts, my white school friends, for example, weren't able to answer even the basic question of what does it mean to you to be white? So if we'd grown up in the same environments and we'd gone to the same schools and we had the same circle of friends and listened to the same music, what was it about my life versus their life that meant I was aware of being Black and they weren't aware of being white? And that's where my first inclination of this concept of everyday friction came from.
I like the notion that although friction is a wearing process, that it can be transformative. So you talked about the use of sandpaper producing something. I think we've all seen videos of people making things out of wood and sanding them down, beautiful artifacts or representations of people. And that's taken quite hard work. You know, if anybody's done any sanding, would know that it's not an easy job. You've got to put effort into it. You've got to engage with it. So what conclusion did you come up with in terms of your white counterparts not being able to kind of speak about white identity, yet you being able to kind of formulate Black identity just from your own experience without any outside input?
The first conclusion that I came to was that there must be something outside of us as individuals that was influencing how we developed. And that is when I started to get really curious about what is on the high street, what messages we got from Disney films, what kind of items are in first aid boxes, just to really start to think about perhaps it's not internally us as individuals that have the overall influence on our racial identities, but it's us as individuals within our environments. And it's the environment that causes then the friction on us. And that is where things for me, because I started to just become incredibly fascinated by the different things in the world that had started or had helped me to understand what it meant for me to be Black. They've subsequently become part of what I call my Black Pack on my race awareness and racial identity training. But for me as a Black woman, I was relating to these things either as being explicitly for me or explicitly not for me, in a way that when I showed them to white people in my life, they were just overwhelmed by their lack of knowledge and awareness. And ultimately for me, that was the indicator of the friction. They weren't experiencing everyday friction in these spaces, and I absolutely was. And it's that friction that shaped my understanding of what it meant for me to be Black.
So give me some examples. Give us some examples of those things that produced the everyday friction.
I always love this. I always love this, Rory, because I feel as though they're so desperately obvious that in some ways it feels patronizing even talking to you about them. But the kicker when I do the training and I have these conversations is about plasters. And the fact that to all of us, they are plasters and we use them when we cut ourselves. But when you actually do pay attention to a plaster, you realize that actually the colour of a plaster has been very specifically chosen for a specific purpose. And when we start to draw attention to that, it then for me is a case of, oh, well, it's a plaster and I'm going to use it, but I'm aware it's not designed for me. But it has been designed for white skin and to accommodate being camouflaged more so than on black skin to white skin. And therefore there is the absence of friction because it's unnoticed. It's not seen. The same with the colour nude. And the fact that I know that nude tights and nude makeup aren't designed for me. And there is that moment of friction. And then I move on to find what is designed for me. But my counterparts, my white friends who would be looking to buy nude makeup would absolutely be drawn to a colour titled that. So there's lots and lots of examples from kind of the messages that we've got from Disney films to how it is that we use certain language. All of those things provide for me the experience of friction that just rubs against my black identity and helps me shape my understanding of this is or isn't for me based on the fact that I'm black.
Yes. And I was just thinking when you were talking about plasters, those who may be listening in the United States may be experiencing a bit of friction themselves here because they'll be thinking, well, what the hell are plasters? They're Band-Aids. If you listen, it's a Band-Aid. But, you speak very eloquently about this. And I can remember as a younger man in the 70s speaking with a friend of mine at the time who was black, and she would lament the fact that she would go into Boots, like all her friends did, to buy makeup, and there just wasn't any makeup for her. She would just literally have to go to maybe specialised Caribbean shops in Moss Side, which is quite a big black area, still is, I think, to some extent. And I remember a Dlee when I think it was Boots, which is a department store, and their brand number 7 produced a whole range for black people. I think she bought the entire store out. I think she bought the entire store out. But it's only when, as you say, when they're absolutely blindingly obvious. Mm-hmm. They're absolutely obvious, but you would never know unless someone told you. Yeah,
and this is an interesting fact. So I actually used to work at Boots in the head office, and when number 7 were looking to expand their range of black foundations, I was one of the black women who was given a sample to try. And interestingly, a colleague a couple of desks away was also given a sample to try. And although we are obviously different shades, we were both given the colour cocoa. And that's typically what I experience, is that there's a ton of different white shades, ivory, porcelain, beige, tan, natural, neutral, nude, and then there would be the one cocoa shade that would somehow have to accommodate the wide range of black skin tones. And that's just one example where, if it worked for me, then I was lucky. But if it didn't, then it shaped my identity and I moved on.
Yeah, and there's also there's a societal nod there, isn't there? In the we'll just placate people by we've done our bit. There you go. That's for you, without really taking the time to understand that not every person's skin colour is different. I mean, I've got quite a red face this morning. I look on the camera. I don't know what you do with foundation for my face, quite frankly. But I met a black woman on the train yesterday. I was talking to a black woman on the train back from Manchester. Her skin colour is different to yours. And it's interesting how some people really struggle to talk about just that, isn't it? As if it's some kind of insult,
And that's a really important part of the work that I do and the training that I do, is that although the social agenda is very much focused on anti-racism and identifying racism in order to obliterate it, which I 100% agree with, what we have to be able to recognize before that is that for a lot of white people who haven't developed their sense of racial identity, they can't even discern between race and racism. And therefore, to remove everything leaves a massive vacuum where there should be a conversation. So the development of racial identity actually needs to start with these everyday conversations. Greetings cards, have you ever noticed how few Black people actually appear on mainstream greetings cards? And to have those conversations so that other people can experience that sense of everyday friction. Because what that then means is that there's tolerance that's built up and there's resilience that's built up to be able to withstand the much heavier and more painful conversations of racism and anti-racist strategies. So the people who are the ones that decide on the colours that are used on plasters and Barbie dolls, greetings cards, etc., need to be able to have conversations where they can confidently use the word Black without wondering whether or not they're going to be punished for that. And that needs to come from developing their own sense of their racial identity and what it means to them.
Absolutely. And also, I think it's also about how to frame respectful conversations. I had a wonderful three-way conversation on the train back from Manchester with Alex, who's going to be a doctor. I don't think he'll ever listen. And Frida, who was a Black woman who was a chemical engineer. She had a master's degree in chemical engineering, a first. I was incredibly impressed with anybody with a first. And it was a crowded train, and we were talking about her kind of career. And I said to her, honest question, how did being Black influence the trajectory of your career? And I swear the people in the next seat nearly fainted because I'd used the word Black and asked a Black person the question. And it was received as it was transmitted, and we had a wonderful, meaningful conversation, just three of us talking across the carriage. And it was really interesting to hear her trajectory and her incredible career. She was definitely pushing down the doors and breaking barriers. But, I think one of the things I'd like to get across in our interview is there's nothing wrong with talking about people's skin colour as long as you are doing it in a way that is with genuine curiosity and for the betterment of the conversation that you're having. But what's your thoughts?
I agree with you. I think that the sense of using, so for example, to refer to me as a Black woman is not a racist statement at all. And again, that sense of everyday friction, it feels bizarre for me to say that because to me it feels so obvious, but it explains some of the awkwardness or the muted tones, or perhaps just the total avoidance as people refer to me in every other way other than Black. Of course there are the derogatory terms, but that's the case with any characteristic. And so what's really important is that people need to be able to step into these conversations and acknowledge their own sense of vulnerability, to acknowledge their own sense of awkwardness and to own that.
Yeah.
Own that so that they can then navigate in these conversations. Because again, phrases such as I don't see colour, although I can empathically understand the sentiment of that, because what I believe is being communicated is I try not to judge people by the colour of their skin. To assert phrases like I don't see colour are not only not true, but actually cause more problems. And I often think about kind of hearing that, but then also hearing white people congratulate each other on their tan once they've come back from holiday, in which case you do see colour and it's okay. It's okay that you see it, but it's what you do with what it is that you observe. And to discriminate on one hand is unwelcome in our society, but also to think if we imagine it's not there, that's also unwelcome. It's the beauty of being able to acknowledge colour and to provide equitable provisions when they're required, but also just to be able to have conversations so that we can not only meet people's needs, but appreciate and celebrate the differences.
Absolutely. And I suppose there's no more important place of that than the therapy room. You know, I'm sure that there are black clients who meet white therapists or vice versa. And, you know, part of developing any relationship is to see every part of the person, you know, is to acknowledge every part of the person. And I do think that we can't, I do think that some people may struggle with that because they are so frightened of saying, well, if I say that, I'm going to be seen as a bigot or a racist or that type of thing. And to be honest, I never see any training apart from, well, you know, I know about, we talked about your training, but what's helpful about it is that it helps facilitate those conversations. It isn't a case of a polarised position. You're white, I'm black, and we're facing off. It's a case of how do we get to know each other? How do we have those respectful conversations?
And that's one area that I think as a society we haven't quite taken stock of yet, is that we haven't taken stock of where individual racial groups actually start when it comes to our understanding of who we are within the bigger systems and who we are as individuals. So I know that for myself and in my family, you know, being black is such an everyday element of how we exist that we as a family can talk about being black, and there's joy, there's laughter, there's humour all within that. In which case we have not only a developed sense of individual identity, but also a developed sense of social identity and who we are to each other as black people, but also what we look like within these bigger systems. When you then flip that to white families who may only actually refer to their white skin when they talk about going on holiday or being out in the sun and applying sun cream, or within the context of racism, if it occurs at all as a conversation, then what you have is a conversational capacity between groups that's phenomenally different. So for us to then be expected to unite in what is just nothing short of a massively vulnerable field of conversations about racism, and we're expected to form allyships across these differences when in fact we don't know where each other are to begin with, I feel as though it sets us up for failure. So the training that I provide and the way it is that I invite people to connect with each other is to actually understand, I don't see the world in the way that you do. And actually the single beast that has created that for both of us is racism. Racism is the thing that is between us and that pictures each other as a threat. And what it is that we want to be able to do is to form an allyship across that racial divide that says, do you know what? I know I don't understand your worldview, and you know you don't understand mine. So let's try and remain in conversation and build bridges across the division so that we can actually eradicate this plague on our society, which has been around longer than any one of us on the planet has.
Well, on those thoughts, Sarah, I enjoy that continual exploration between us. It's always a joy when we meet and talk, both on the podcast and outside the recording environment, and it's always a joy. So I will say, Sarah Henry, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Sarah Henry. Massive thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all important discussions. There it is. That is Practice Matters. And that is the end of today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I wonder how it feels if you hear that. Does it not feel a bit abrupt? If you're a regular listener, do you not go, hold on a minute, they usually carry on here? What does it feel like when an ending comes, when you're not expecting it? It kind of disrupts you. And this links into our topic today that we're doing is student services, because we are seeing you and we do recognise your journey as studying to become a counsellor psychotherapist, but we're speaking about ending well, the art of goodbye in counselling. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com.
Yeah, well, the reason I chose this subject is because when this podcast is broadcast, it will be at the end of June, or certainly near the end of the academic year, and there'll be lots of people, certainly those who are graduating, maybe degrees or diplomas, who will be leaving and probably not seeing their peers again. Will be the last time, and I thought I'd just offer some words of advice, maybe some words of wisdom about ending well with your peers. It's training to be a counsellor isn't a journey that you can explain to someone who's not been through it. You know, we are I don't want to use a military acronym. We are a band of brothers and sisters. You know, because we've shared our personal development. We've opened windows to ourselves. We've talked about our struggles with working with clients. We've felt disappointment when our assignments have been referred. We've had to give up our lives in some cases for two or more years because study, practice, supervision takes up so much. And, you know, you're going back really into Civvy Street. You've been demobbed, as my dad would say, and you're going to have to pick your life up. It was a bit of a struggle, to be honest, when I left, because I didn't know what to do in my Wednesdays anymore. But more to the point, the people that you shared your journey with, some of them you might see again, you might friend, but some you might never see again. And I think it's the important time to, you know, any unfinished business, to talk to people. I know that sometimes, you know, the journey of training can be a bumpy one, and, you know, people fall out, or people, you know, may have a bit of a grudge. And I think now's the time to kind of not have any regrets. So, you know, if you have had a bumpy ride with a peer, take them to one side and say, look, you know, we're coming to the end now. Let's see if we can make our best peace. Because it's no good working living in a time of regret. You're never going to get a second chance, I don't think. And also, those people who've supported you and helped you along the journey, you know, those people who've picked you up when you've fallen down. It's a good opportunity to say goodbyes and say everything that's on your mind. In our class, we wrote people cards or letters, and I every time I went in the loft, usually to either get my Christmas tree down or put my Christmas tree back, I found myself looking through my file, and I'd sit on the box and I'd read some of them, and I'd hear my wife shouting from downstairs, what are you doing? You know, and I'd be taken back to a time where I was training, and I remembered all those people. I still remember them all. Now I can still put them in my mind's eye, and, you know, I still draw on some of the things that they shared. You know, certainly during my practice, I would think about some of the conversations we've had. It's a great opportunity to end well, to walk out of your class, walk into the next chapter of your life, knowing that you've said all there is to be said. You've not left anything on the table. So important, you know, so important.
Thank you. I think that's an important aspect of endings. I recognize, you know, as we went into this, I put in a mock unexpected ending, because there's different kind of endings, aren't there? And when an ending comes upon you and you're not expecting it, it can feel like the rug is pulled from under your feet. So this is why in counselling, you'll know this, that we recognise the ending. We don't just on the last session at the last 5 minutes say to the client, well, you know what, we've only got 5 minutes left. This is your last session. Thanks a lot. Won't be seeing you again. We're going to be acknowledging the ending as we're coming up to it. Same is true in your training. You know that you're coming to the end of a course. And it is an ending. And I think this all starts with, how are you with endings? It's a personal thing. It's personal development around endings. Are you okay with endings? Are you okay to walk away from the group and go, yes, that was a rich experience in my life and I really value that, but it is now finished and I'm moving on to something else? In other words, I've got to finish one chapter of a book before I can start the other chapter of the book. Or is there a hanging on, saying to the group, no, you know what, we're still going to get together, and why don't we still get together on Friday nights or Thursdays or whatever the day is that you normally meet, but let's do it online, or we're all going to come together often. And what are you holding on to there? What are you trying to keep from avoiding that ending? And that's a personal journey for you. And I'm not saying you shouldn't get together with your peers. I certainly got together with my peers after graduation. We had a great time. But it's separate from the ending. And here's a thing I wanted to throw in on this. If you're doing a multi-year course, so you're at the higher levels of counselling training, you're doing a master's or a degree, or you're doing a level 5, which runs over a number of years, and you come to the end of the first year, you'll be going back into the same group the next year, but it may feel a little bit different. It may. Because it just does. It feels different. And if you are finishing a level 4 and you're starting a level 5 next year, and a few of the people from your group are going on to that progression, it's still going to be a different group. It's not it's okay, I'm still going to see you next year. It's still a saying goodbye and an ending to what you have right now with that group of people. Because you change one person in a group and the whole dynamics of that group changes, and it's no longer the same group. So it's ended. It's ended, that group. And it's a new group. And I think that there's interest in kind of exploring that for self, how your relationship is with endings. And as you said, Rory, say the goodbyes you need to say goodbyes. Here's the thing, that person that you really struggled with during your training, that in PD group, that the hairs on the back of your neck would rise up and you would be frustrated about that person is teaching you all the time. Why am I feeling these feelings? Why I've got this discomfort within this circle? And you know what? You don't know who they will go on to become. You don't know, they may refer clients to you one day. You might one day go in for a job interview and they're there and they run an agency. You don't know. It's a very small world, is counselling and psychotherapy. It's interesting, and this is why we speak often about role confusion and having a supervisor that is known or something like that. It's a small world, and it's worth being kind to the people and being kind, I guess, and letting go of any grudges with the people that you share your journey with, because you might bump up with them again. And also, do you really want to take that with you? Do you really want to take that with you as a feeling? So, I think it lies all in personal development, this, Rory.
It does. And even in the ending, you're still learning. A lot of people think, well, the ending, the learning's finished now. It's just about an ending, and someone will bring some cakes in, and someone will bring, I don't know. We used to smuggle alcohol in when I was a student. I don't know if you're allowed to do that now. But actually, one of the things I learned right at the last minute was I had a, we'd kind of with one of my peers, we'd probably not bumped along as well as we could have done. And I thought, I wonder if I might have been a bit harsh, And I went to this peer and I said, look, I've got to say, I think I might have been a bit harsh, and I'm sorry that, if it's caused you any inconvenience or, any hurt. And the peer had forgotten all about it. He's like, what are you on about, Rory? And it was more important to me than it was to my peer. And it allowed me to let go of stuff that actually wasn't really real. It was just in my head. And in terms of endings, I'm anybody who knows me, I'm a terrible at ending. I'm just awful. I would prefer to go rather than to hang around. But interestingly enough, as my supervisor pointed out, I actually ended up teaching in the same class I was taught in. And I think part of me was kind of a wish fulfillment to go back. It was one of the most incredible periods of my life. It was transformative, both intellectually and spiritually. I was very nourished emotionally through that arc of training. And it was like having a party and not wishing to be over. So I just ended up hosting the party instead of being in the party. And that lasted for a good few years until eventually, I guess my own personal development caught up with me and I was able to move on. But yeah, it's interesting. And I'll share just a little thing. When I went back into that wonderful sunny corner room to teach in Hyde, where I was taught in Greater Manchester, it was a lovely sunny room. Even in the winter, it was still sunny. And I saw the circle of chairs. I could still see every single person who was in that group. And all those years on, 20 odd years on, a bit more now, I can still, if I close my eyes and concentrate, I can still see everybody in those chairs. That's how much it stayed with me. You know, it takes you for the long haul, basically.
Yeah, it's a fitting topic. We're at the right time. Next week is the last Counselling Tutor Podcast episode. If you're listening in real time of this academic run, then we'll break for the summer holidays and then we're back for the new academic year. So there's an ending in that, I guess. And if you're the astute of you will know that when Counselling Tutor Podcast takes a break, when it comes back, there's usually some kind of a change. There's something slightly different, and this year will be no exception. Maybe even a big change. Who knows? Keep your ear tuned to this. But it will be different because we're ending this season, and the last episode of that is next week. If you're listening in real time, it'll be episode 344. And I maintain this. You've been through your training. You've spent the time with those people. It's coming to an end, and the most important ending is within you. How are you looking and seeing and framing this ending? And then how does that feel and fit with you? Is there anything that you feel is incomplete? Is there any circle you wish to complete? The gestalt, as it were, the wholeness of it, as it were. What do you need to bring about? Is there anything unsaid that needs to be said? Are there any thanks and gratitude that need to be said? Now's the time as you approach that ending. Ending well is the name of this topic. And you know, if you look back on abrupt endings, unexpected endings, difficult endings, you may still be able to find within you emotions that are still tied into those endings. They create little mini traumas in a way. They really do. They stick with you when you look back. Well, make this a great ending. Go in prepared for it and do the work you need to do in self so that you look back only, as Rory does, on the fond memories that you spent during that time. And speaking of endings, this is the ending of episode 343 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with ethical and sustainable practice, and we spoke about the importance of having a supervisor who is not only understands online and telephone work, but also is trained in online and telephone work, has an integrated approach to supervision that encompasses the online world. In Practice Matters, we caught up with the fabulous Sarah Henry, who talks about race and everyday friction. Guaranteed that people's eyes have been opened just to hear another person's perspective on their phenomenological experience of the world. And finally, we ended well by talking about the art of the goodbye in counsellor training. Thank you so much for your ears. Thank you so much for your listens, your shares, and your likes. And until we meet again, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource.
Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.